Coming to paperback and e-readers, ISIS Legacy. The sorority secrets from the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Pre-order your copy of ISIS Legacy on Amazon.com today. In history, they talk about the period of Jim Crow. Now, this period of Jim Crow were a series of written and unwritten laws that were meant to make black people second-class citizens in southern states. Now, these Jim Crow laws were oppressive and very brutal, and black people were brutalized and treated like they were less than human. And many people go out here and see Jim Crow as one of the worst periods in American history. But what's sad is many people have not really learned much about the dark days of Jim Crow, because we're seeing not only Jim Crow repeating itself historically, we're seeing the emergence of a new Jim Crow era, and that era is not in the South and those so-called southern states. No, what we're seeing is the rise of what I call the Jim Crow North. Now, this Jim Crow North is starting to emerge in many of these blue or left-leaning states, and many of these blue and left-leaning states are enacting the same kinds of unwritten social laws and unwritten social policies that took place in the Jim Crow South. Now, many of these leftists come out and say that they're being very tolerant and accepting of black people, but when we look at many of the policies they're putting in place, they are just as racist as the policies that were in the Jim Crow South. And when we look at some of the policies and interpretations of law that they have put in place over the last 4 to 5 years, they are just as bad as those in the Jim Crow South. Now, one of the great travesties of justice that make me think about the formation of a Jim Crow North took place in the blue state of Pennsylvania under leftist judges, and that was the conviction of Bill Cosby for a sexual assault that he did not commit. Now, that whole trumped up conviction was something that you would definitely see in the dark days of the Jim Crow South, but no, this took place in a blue state under leftists, and nobody really batted an eye. And again, that's really troubling, because it shows me how your North is changing and becoming just as racist as the South, because the actions that this prosecutor, Kevin Steele, participated in were the same kind of actions that prosecutors in the Jim Crow South participated in when they wanted to go out here and file some trumped up charges on a black man, and in order to get so-called justice, but the justice wasn't about clearing cases and finding some black person to put a crime on. And that's what the kind of interpretation of law that we're seeing more and more of in the Jim Crow North, where campaigns like the Me Too movement have gained momentum, because the Me Too movement is no different than many of those white females who were in many of those southern towns who would make allegations against black men, and this would lead to either a black man being lynched or a black man winding up in prison for a crime he did not commit. Again, Me Too came from left-leaning states, and these allegations were made by many women who were on the left and said that they were so tolerant of black people, but it seems like every week they were trying to make a black man the new brute of the month. Now, another travesty of justice that I saw was the murder of George Floyd. And after the murder of George Floyd, many black people thought, oh, things were going to change, but we clearly saw that the conviction of Derek Chauvin was basically an empty symbolic gesture in order to pacify the masses who had turned up in 2020 as related to years of frustration about the policies that took place, especially a lot of these murders that took place in left-leaning cities of black men. And many people thought that there was going to be change, but we see that your Jim Crow types on the left wanted to go back to business as usual. And after they sacrificed Derek Chauvin to try to make things look fair, we saw them quickly going back to business as usual with the murder of Amir Locke and the revelation that your mayor, Jacob Frey, had not gone out here and ended no-knock raids. No, he had just changed the policy to make it look like he had ended no-knock raids, but it really had made it where all the police had to do was announce themselves and still participate in the same types of no-knock raids, which were designed to terrorize black Americans. Because the no-knock raid, again, is an archaic approach to crime fighting that was designed during the war on drugs, and it was not designed to stop drug dealers. It was designed to terrorize black people. Now, this policy was the same type of policy that the Jim Crow types in the South loved to do, because the Jim Crow types, they saw black people as second-class citizens, and they believed that they were in their rights to go out here and abuse black people. So they had no problem with this type of policy. But again, these types of policies are coming from those on the left who say that they're so tolerant of black people. But when we look at their policies, they're very similar to those that your white supremacists in the South participated in. Now, another case that really shows the Jim Crow North emerging is the case of the sentencing of Daunte Wright. Now, in this sentencing of Daunte Wright, we see that the judge, who was an Asian woman, went out here and said that she empathized with Kim Potter, the woman who murdered Daunte Wright. And again, this is the type of emotional judgment that white supremacist judges in the Jim Crow South would participate in and give passes to those good white folks for what they would say accidentally taking somebody's life and letting them go on live their lives. Again, no different than what happened with the murderers of Emmett Till, and that's what I see happening here. And again, most people aren't looking at this through the lens of history, and because they're not looking at the lens of history, they are not seeing how many of these blue states are out here participating in the exact same behavior of their ancestors in the Jim Crow South, nor are they connecting dots to see that the same political party that created the oppressive policies of the Jim Crow South is now controlling many of these so-called left-leaning states, and these blue states are, again, all controlled by the same political party. And basically, we are seeing the rise of this dark Jim Crow North, and sadly, because your Jim Crow North goes out here and gets themselves some minority bootlicks and black bootlicks to represent them, they go out here and passively talk about diversity, but aggressively push the same old racism and white supremacy in their policies. And that is something many black Americans are not thinking critically about, and many black Americans who live in these northern states don't really think critically about the oppression that's going on or the oppression that is being enforced by people of color and black people who have been brainwashed to drink the Kool-Aid of integration and think that they are just Americans and not black Americans, and do not go out here and follow the rule of law. Because when I look at the case of Daunte Wright and Kim Potter's sentence, it clearly shows me that that's a Jim Crow policy that was, if ever was one, and it was a Jim Crow policy because only in Jim Crow America could you go out here and just choose to not go out here and follow the sentencing guidelines and give that kind of pass to a white woman. Because in the Jim Crow South, the white woman was elevated to this high position of sweet and innocent and could believed to have never done anything wrong. And that's what we saw with Kim Potter, who smiled after she got that light sentence. And this is the same type of travesty of justice we got in the Jim Crow South. And the Cosby conviction was another case of another travesty, the kind of travesty we got in the dark days of the Jim Crow South. But we're getting these cases not in the Jim Crow South, in states like Alabama and Georgia and Arkansas, where the civil rights movement was going on. No, we are seeing this in these left-leaning cities, which were supposed to be the place where black people moved to get a new life. But in the 21st century, most of those black Americans are being subjected to the old-time oppression. And as they're subjected to this old-time oppression, many of them are clueless to what's going on here and don't really understand what is happening because they're not studying the subtle politics that's transpiring around them. But when I look at it from the historical perspective, I am seeing the rise of the Jim Crow North, and sadly, we have a lot of black people who this time are supporting it, not understanding you are supporting the institution that is about creating a system of keeping you in a second-class position. Yes, they'll put a few bootlicks and a few hand-picked shills in front of you and say they've arrived, but the whole thing is that it's all about keeping you at the bottom and making sure that you stay at the bottom. Now, this video is not going to be monetized, so if you guys could donate to the Cash App, it would be greatly appreciated. Or if you could pick up some of the books on the SJS Direct imprint, that would also be greatly appreciated. I wanted to educate people about this pattern that I'm seeing, and I wanted people to understand what's going on. So if you guys could, again, donate to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated, because that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess, featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online bookstores everywhere today.